Welcome to Tree Talking Time, where we talk all things tree dogs, from the smallest feists to the largest hounds, treating squirrels to bears and everything in between. And from time to time, we might even run a little fast game. So we're here today with Rehan and Charlie, and you guys work for a pretty cool company, and that's why we're here to talk to you guys. But not only do you work for this cool company, you guys also have dogs, which makes it even cooler, because that way you guys have some actual experience. The company you guys work for is Garmin, which pretty much everybody uses. There's a few competitors, but you guys are the big guy. So why don't you tell me a little about yourselves? Rehan, why don't you start?
All right, I'm up first. So my name is Rehan Nana. Been at Garmin for about 4 years. I've always kind of been in the outdoor industry. Kind of dogs has been my background. I'm in Kansas City, and Kansas City kind of grew up in a family with bird dogs and bird hunting. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth. And Kansas City sits at a really good nexus of bird hunting states. And so currently my dogs are a setter that's about to retire, and I got a young Labrador coming up, and so that's what I got. But here at Garmin I do PR, so I work with media. I'm really lucky, and I get to work with our hunting sportsman outdoor products. I've always just been a Garmin fan, and that's kind of how I started here. I guess I bugged them long enough. I stopped by the national office long enough that they finally gave me a gig. So,
all righty, Charlie.
All right. Well, my name's Charlie. Been working here at Garmin, coming on 3 years now. Actually worked for one of our dealers there before this, pretty much doing the same job. I work on the product support side in the dog department. So there's there's quite a few of us, but there's a good chance if you call in with questions or issues, I might be one of the ones to answer the phone. As far as with starting off with dogs, I don't have anybody in my family that ever hunted with dogs. We had sled dogs when I was much younger. I tried my hand at a bird dog. That didn't go well because she was gun shy and hated the water.
Jeez.
So she wasn't going to make a very good dog. Got into my first hound. I was actually looking for another bird dog when I found her, and then just got into the coon hunting, and one dog turned into two, and now there's
snowballed on you.
Now there's 4 hounds and now a new beagle puppy to rabbit hunt with. So it kind of escalated quickly.
I didn't know you were into sled dogs before, and B, you went into beagles. I didn't know that about you either.
Yeah, Ben, I just got a beagle puppy. She's 8 months old, I think. Yeah.
Nice.
But you just got her like a month ago, didn't you?
Yeah, I've only had her right about a month, maybe a little bit longer. Yeah.
You gonna trial, or are you just gonna hunt with that beagle?
No, I will just hunt with her.
Yeah. It's funny. It's like every time I go to like a beagle event, and even when I go to hound events, it's like beagles especially, it's always one of those I look at, I'm like, I could see myself having about 6 of these things,
Come on, do it.
Yeah, I know. I've thought about that. It's let me get a handle on the retriever stuff first, then I'll probably move over to the other side.
There you go.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about like Garmin history and how Garmin got into like the dog market? Because Garmin was at first. I remember the first time I ever heard of Garmin. We're putting a Garmin tracking or a Garmin GPS in the car to go to vacation, and then all of a sudden, here comes the Astro, and right around the time I got into hunting, and so it was like I luckily never had to deal with the old beep beeps, but.
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of the history on 2 sides of it. Starting with Garmin. Garmin started actually here in Kansas City. It's 2 gentlemen, Gary Burrell and Men Cow, and it's one of those things where most people don't know. That's actually the 2 founders' names put together, Gary and Men, so Garmin. Yeah. And it was really kind of interesting. They were working for a company, and at that time, GPS was a fledgling technology, and they're like, man, this is pretty cool, and this would be really great for the civilian market, because a lot of times it was just military at that time. And so they started that, and if you look at across all of Garmin's segments, there's 5 different segments. It runs everything. Like so many times people look at individual, like a lot of times, like we look at dog products, right? But
Mhm.
we make everything from planes to boats, watches, everything. There's always a GPS component to it, or in many regards. And so that just continued to grow. And I want to say it was the first one was the Astra 220. So it's a lot of times what Garmin will do is go in and to an area that may not have the tech that we have and kind of implement it there. And so I think it was the 220 was the first Astra dog tracking unit, and I think that was back in '06 or '07.
Okay.
And then we're really so that was kind of the entry into the dog world. But then I think it was 2011 was when we acquired Tritronics, right?
Mhm.
And Tritronics, everybody, that's kind of that household name where they started back in I think '68. They were the one of the first one, if not the first one, to create training collars. And so over that, essentially 40, 50-year history, they've really, that's what they did. They make the best stuff.
Yep.
And when we acquired them in 2011, they came under the Garmin brand, is where you start seeing the incorporation. I think the Alpha 100 was the first unit I worked on together with that one, and you're seeing the incorporation of both tracking and training
Mhm.
starting there. So combining those two forces, and you look across. I mean, after the Alpha 100, I think there was the Astro 430, there was the Pro 550 Plus, there was the Astro 900. You've got 200i, and this is all in conjunction with specific training collars only,
Mhm.
but this is from a track and train perspective.
Yep.
Like I said, 200i, Alpha 10, all the different collars. And so you can kind of see that once those two forces were kind of combined, you're really putting out all of those different products that I think I've always said. I wrote an article way back when the Alpha first came out. I was like, this is just going to kind of change the way that we relate, train, and hunt with our dogs. And it
Oh,
really did.
absolutely.
Yeah. And that's always the thing how I ended up here. I always just trusted Garmin. It's that's that. So that's kind of a little bit about the history of it, and hopefully that wasn't too long-winded for you.
No, I mean, I think it's very interesting. Like, heck, even the name and stuff, I would have never known.
Yeah.
And there definitely has been an evolution to the products. Like I said, I got in. I guess I didn't realize when you guys had started the dog tracking stuff, but so I would have gotten into the dog tracking stuff only a couple years after, and got my first tracking system in probably '09.
What'd you start? So it was a 220.
Yeah, and then but I had DC-30 collars.
Yeah.
So the first good collar.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, like, right, '09 to now, that's really not that long of a period of time,
Oh,
right? And to see how many different units have kind of come out within that space. And like Charlie and I were talking like earlier, like, man, well, it's like, what do you like most about this one or that one? And it's like, for me, like one of the things I actually just like all the different units. And the thing that for me it's interesting is like how how so you start with the Alpha 100, and then you compare the Alpha 100 to the 200 and 200i, but then it's like you got Pro 550 Plus, you got the Alpha 10, which may not be as big kind of in the hound world, or at least the Pro 550 Plus, but those are just such cool units, and they're so specialized in kind of who they're really catering to, I think, from that side. So to see that kind of exponential growth of technology and units, I think is really cool to see.
oh, definitely. Now you've kind of mentioned some of the newer products that you guys have launched, like the 200, and I'm still with the 100 system, so I don't know much about the new stuff. So why don't you kind of give me an education on some of these newer products? Like there's a 200, there's a 200i. You just launched the new collars that are the T15X, the T5X. You got a lot of stuff here rolling. You had the Alpha 10 rolled out within the last year. So
Yeah.
last year's been a big year for new products.
Man, I'll tell you what, for launching products, it's been busy, not a day's rest. But yeah, and Charlie, feel free to hop in here. We can just kind of back into it, I guess, is that, we'll start with the different progression, like, and we'll say from the track and train side of things. So there was the Alpha 100, and I'm pretty sure it was the next one was going to be the Pro 550 Plus. And we'll touch on this one just for a little bit. So it's the old tube style. So it's like if you look at the old Tritronic tube style, one hand, no look training.
Yep.
What they did there was they said, and this is one of the things I think what's really interesting about Garmin is that customer feedback is so important in terms of when we put out a new product. So many times it's from years of development, testing, listening to customers of what they want. And with that unit, what was special was taking, all right, well, we know that the old style tube controller is really what's loved for training. And some people don't like all of the horsepower that the Alpha GPS has. And so they're going to, make a really small 1 inch by 1 inch screen that gives a delta, showing where the dog is. It's a 3-dog system. And pretty much it's robust training, simplified tracking. With that one,
more like to the bird dog side, where most dogs relatively within sight or more
well, I mean, it gives you that. I always say with GPS, it's an insurance policy, right? Like you can have a county bird dog that can roll pretty big on the prairie and you're still always knowing where that dog is pretty much to the foot. With that one, kind of from that side with it. And so you see that, and the reason I bring up that 550 plus is because in the 200i there's the Pro View, which is kind of that delta that just kind of gives the directional arrow distance, really a simplified view of it, of where the dog is in relation to you. And that was something that we said, wow, people really like that within the Pro 550 plus. Let's roll that over into the 200i. And so that was one of the features that kind of came to the 200i from Pro 550 plus, and that's just kind of showing that progression side of it.
One of the nice things too with the Pro 550 plus is, if you're only hunting with 3 dogs, it's much less expensive than an Alpha. And you also, if you need the maps, you have a smartphone, you can pair it to the Explorer app and get mapping and see your dogs on a map. So you still have that option if you want to.
Well, and that's kind of a new feature, isn't it? The pairing with phone.
Yeah. There was a software update released for that. It's been a little while now, but I mean, I've used it and it works really well. It's nice to be able to have that simplicity, but still be able to get a map if you need it.
Gotcha.
Right. And that touches on, not to get off course from the other things, but something that's I always say is interesting is the ecosystem, is what it's called within Garmin. And so it's not necessarily just relating to one product. So like you guys pairing into the drive tracks and stuff like that.
Yep.
Pairing into watches, being able to connect to the phone for mapping and stuff like that. That's something that I always tell people is like, see what is within your product's ecosystem, because it's really giving that ability to make the hunt more efficient, effective, and just kind of keep you in the field from that side.
And I mean, I agree. And I even do that. Like I'm an iPhone guy. I've got a Mac computer. Same reason. It all connects. It all plays nice together, and it makes life a lot easier if everything talks together. So if you're going to stick to one system or another, whatever it is, it's a lot easier if everything you have it plays together, like you said. So by going with a big ecosystem that has all kinds of different, like you said, the watch, the drive track, the different handhelds, you've got multiple options of hooking different things together. And of using different products, different ways of using it to fit your own needs.
Yeah, 100%. But getting back to the units, kind of the new ones that we've launched. So if we look at the 200i, I think, what was it? I think the Alpha 100 launched in 2012, right? And then the 200i launched, Charlie, correct me if I'm wrong here, it was 2020. So when you look at it, that's a long period of time for a second gen product to come out. But part of that is it's, the Alpha 100, when it showed up, it just kind of like, I'll speak for myself. It just kind of blew my hair back. Like, wow, like how are you going to top that? And so it goes back to that idea of really listening, developing, figuring out what people like, what people don't like, before putting out that second gen product. And when that 200i came out, I thought it just nailed it on the head there. It's got the screen. One of the things you're going to notice right off the bat is it's a larger screen. This one's turned off. I don't know if you guys are doing video or not. 3.5 inch sunlight readable display. It's kind of had a complete design overhaul to it. instead of the traditional 3-button training up top, you still have that, but you've got quick keys on the side, so you can really fully customize that unit to really what you like within your hunting style. Like one of the things they say is it's like you and I could be hunting the exact same thing with the same breed of dog, but we can hunt entirely different.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that I think is really cool about the 200i is that it's incredibly customizable for how you want to hunt with it. And once you lock that screen out, you can use the quick keys, still have that be completely functional. And then one of the other things you're going to notice on it is
Yep.
it's got a big orange button down the side, and that's what the 200i stands for, is in reach. So a lot of the places we hunt, we don't have cell service. In reach is
No.
yeah, hopefully.
I hunt in West Virginia. A cell phone is a paperweight.
Yeah, well, one of the cool things with that is the incorporate. I've always been, a huge fan of InReach. And for people who are not familiar, InReach is a two-way SMS SOS communication device. So you can text with it and you can hit an SOS if God forbid something happened. And what it is really unique about it is it operates on something called the Iridium satellite service, which it's not a cell coverage. So when you don't have cell service anymore, the inReach is still going to have that. And so when you've got that, you can still keep in contact with people, loved ones back home, friends, communicate. And if, like I said, if God forbid something happened and you fall and you break your legs, like I know my dogs love me, but they ain't packing me out. So you
Just
can
let your wife know that you're late for dinner.
yeah, hey, broke my leg, start dinner without me, type of thing. But if you trigger that, it goes up to something called the Garmin International Emergency Response Coordination Center in Texas. They coordinate with local authorities and get you out. And that's really important because the thing that I've learned is nobody ever wakes up in the morning thinking they're going to have an emergency in the afternoon.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So that's that. And just the peace of mind it brings to be able to, after the long, cold, day, just to be able to text people and say, hey, everything's all right.
So just for like a quick little side note here, I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie 127 Hours.
Yes.
Okay, guy's rock climber. So this is not quite hunting, but outdoors, out in the middle of nowhere by himself. A big giant rock pins him. He ends up having to cut his arm off, and it's called 127 hours because he stays there for that long until he cuts his arm off and can get out and get rescued. Just think, if the guy had an injury took to him, all he would have had to do is hit the button, and it would have.
That's a true story too.
Yeah,
that's a true
not
story.
fake.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like it's, like I said, nobody ever wakes up in the morning thinking they're going to have an emergency in the afternoon. I'm sure you guys remember this, but like back when I was younger, and like this stuff wasn't around, and cell service was so spotty. Like I used to go out hunting for a weekend, leave on a Friday. I'd leave a note on the kitchen table, say, hey, I'm going here. I should be back by Sunday at 7 p.m. If you don't hear from me by 9, call my brother and the police, right? And that you don't have to do that anymore. InReach really kind of takes that out. And, with InReach, just the other thing, it operates kind of like a cell plan. But what's unique about Garmin is you can turn it on and off. It's a month-to-month thing. So,
Nice.
yeah, if you're only using it 3 months out of the year, great, only pay for 3 months. But once you start using InReach, like it's tough to once people start using InReach, it's tough to yeah, you get used to it. Charlie, what do you like about 200i?
Can you hear us, Charlie?
Sorry, there we go. I was really excited when we started learning about them for the group feature.
Yeah.
To be able to group dogs together. So, Ben, like I'm sure you hunt with a bunch of different guys. I hunt with 5 or 6 different guys. I track their dogs at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
If I wasn't hunting with one or was hunting with a different one night, I'd have to go through on the 100 and deactivate each individual dog.
Yep.
Now I can set it up with like Ben. If you and I hunt, I can set that up to Ben's dogs, all those dogs in one list. I can just go deactivate that entire list in one shot instead of going through, all 5, all 6, all 10 dogs, whatever it is that you have. it makes a huge time saver. And the other one, those buttons, those manual buttons on the side, you can scroll through your different training modes, your different dogs that you have for the 3 buttons on top without having to touch the screen.
Okay.
So you can have the screen locked and you can scroll through those. You can set those buttons to do really whatever you want. Like I've got one on here, I can push the left button, it takes me to the map. Middle button takes me to the dog compass. Right button marks a waypoint. I mean, they're very, very customizable, which is really, really nice. I mean, you can almost use this thing without touching the screen if you set it up right.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty close to it.
I think one of the biggest complaints I've heard by people about the 200 is just the lack of, like, people that are not tech savvy and not setting it up, and they just get lost. It's almost just too much, and they've gotten used to that 100 that can only do so much, and then you hand them this thing that can do so much more, and they just get lost.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll touch on that. First and foremost, Charlie, you can give out your personal cell number and people can call you.
Yeah, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, no, but what I will say, it's like, that's, with the 100, actually, that was actually kind of part of the design philosophy with the 200i, is to be able to make it customizable, but to try to make the interface as easy as possible. But it's still got a lot of horsepower, and it's easy. You can get lost with it, no doubt. And what I was going to say is
You start talking to these old bear hunters that can barely use their cell phone, but they've gotten used to this 100, and then you hand them the 200, and they're just like, wait a minute, I got to set it up. And
well, that's true, and it's one of those things that the customer support team, Charlie's team, and all those guys, they do a really good job of putting up articles, just walking through, and videos and stuff like that. So I would say for if you're just getting into the 200i, it really would pay dividends just to go check out some of those. What are the frequently asked questions? How do you get started? What are the things? Because those all actually live right on the product page. If you go over to the far right hand side, you can go kind of the support system for each product, and it pretty much outlines so many different things. But yeah, that's what I say there. Start there, and then, like I said, if that doesn't work, give Charlie a call. Right?
there you go.
Yeah.
So now you guys just recently launched these new collars. What's the difference, and what's the big deal with these new ones?
Yes.
Charlie's hat. He's proudly wearing a T5X hat.
Man, and again, I want one of those, Charlie. We're gonna have a conversation as soon as we get off this one.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. So I mean, Charlie, do you want to start in on that one, or you want me to, or how do you want to?
Yeah, I can. We can work on that. So I mean, really, I would say the biggest improvement with the X series collars, we'll just call them, is the battery life. Yeah. I mean, if I remember right, it's rated up to 80 hours. Obviously that depends on a lot of settings and how fast your update rate is, things like that. But I can say from personal experience, it is much better.
Yeah.
Battery life.
So just to hop in, not to interrupt, just to kind of, it is up to 80 hours. I think previous one were 20 to 40 on the 15s.
Right.
And what kind of Charlie mentioned, this is something that I was letting people know, this across the board with GPS. GPS, when you come down to it, is a very power consumptive technology, right? So how you're setting update rates and stuff like that, and this is on all GPS products across the whole industry, is the more GPS you're using, the faster you're going to drain those batteries. So just that's something to keep in mind on that side.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Charlie, I interrupted you though.
No, you're fine. For those out there that are using the full size TT15s and you have a Mac computer, then like you and I do, you can't update those on a Mac. The new 15Xs you can.
Okay.
And they update with Garmin Express rather than Web Updater. So now if you have, like I've got a mini collar and a full size collar, I have to have, had to have 2 different computers with 2 different software to update both of those.
Okay.
So now, you just do it all on one, which is really, really nice. The sleep mode that they have on the new 15Xs.
What is the purpose of that?
The purpose of that is it's to save battery life. What it does is it basically shuts down any transmission that the collar's doing. So it's really, really all it's running is that flashing light is all it really the power's using.
But
So
it's important to
yeah.
note though, where it's like you're remotely shutting that down, right?
Right.
Like, you're
Yep.
remotely shutting it from the handheld.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So,
I mean,
battery life, and Charlie touched on this too, if you like, you know, in kind of lost dog situations, or if your collar is super, I mean, being able to put that thing into sleep mode, navigate to last track point, get there, wake it back up, get another track point, you have the ability to kind of prolong that battery life even further in order for in a lost dog situation.
Okay. So that's the main thing. The main use, I guess, would be if you're out on the mountain, you lose your dog, instead of that thing tracking all night long while you're not even out there looking for your dog, you can put it in sleep mode.
right.
Yeah.
The next day when you're coming back out to look for your dog, then you can try to pick it back up.
Yeah, you just go to the last turn it, wake it back up, go get another track point, and then, you know, start moving to that location. Hopefully you can close that gap. And I mean, that's you know, worst case scenario. I mean, it's something as simple as throwing the dogs in a box. You know what I mean? You can remotely turn it off. It's just that prolonging a battery life, because like I said, it's an insurance policy GPS, but it's like once your units go down, I mean, that's all there is to it. So across the board, one of the things like this with all Garmin products is what we're trying to do is really prolong that battery life in everything that we do, from watches to dog collars.
Now you just brought up an interesting point about turning it off when you, or putting it in sleep mode when you put the dogs in the dog box. I know when I put my dogs in my dog box, I lose connection, and then a lot of times it has a hard time reconnecting. So I'm guessing like that would also help with that, because then when you pull the dogs back out, wake it back up. I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, or am I just having random issues that I shouldn't be having?
No, so in Charlie from, you know, customer support, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like when you lose connection, I mean, to a dog, it's because there's an interference with that top GPS receiver, right?
Right.
And that's something that can happen. It's like if your dog kind of gets down under some really, you know, under log really thick or something like that. Like it's something has broken that communication between the top black part of which is the GPS receiver and this guy. And so one of the things is, and that happens, I got a call last Sunday. Somebody's like, man, something I can't figure out where my dog is. And it's one of those things is, hey, navigate to the last track point, and both the handheld and the collar are both they're still trying to talk to one another again, right? It's not like they're not talking to one another, but it can just to reestablish that communication can take just a minute, right? So
Like I said, I really didn't know what the point of that whole sleep mode was. I'd heard about it and I'm like, what do you do with that?
are you a believer yet? I mean, was the explanation good enough for you?
You're making my wife not like you. I mean, I can tell you that much.
We're just staying out longer, man.
Wanting to spend a bunch of money here. I've been wanting to spend a bunch of money. So trying to sell her on the whole inReach thing. And when the 200i came out, I was like, look, you should let me buy this because this is, and she's like, but yours works 90% of the time, right? Like when you're here coon hunting around the house. I said, yeah. And she goes, so that's only for when you bear hunt, like a week out of a year. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, yeah, that's a lot of money to spend for a week out of the year.
So here's what I'm going to tell you, though, that something a lot of people don't really think about with inReach as well, where it's like everything can be fine when you're out hunting if you don't have cell service. But what happens if something goes wrong at home and somebody needs to get a hold of you? How did they do that? And not to be morbid here, that happened to my uncle. My aunt, this was years ago. She passed away. He was on a 2-week backpacking trip, right? And there's no way to get a hold of him. So the other part of inReach is it's a two-way SMS. So people can reach out to you as well. And even so far where it's like you can set up tracking on that where you know, your wife can just log on your computer and see your, like, if you're moving and you're supposed to be moving, great. If you're not moving and you're supposed to be moving, reach out to say, hey, is everything all right?
Wow. I didn't know you could do that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You guys are paving the way. That's for sure. A lot of different things and a lot of different applications that I know a lot of people don't think about. So we look at it as a very simplistic tool that it tracks our dog. That's it's the main reason we buy it. That's what we do with it. And we don't realize all the other stuff it can do, but you're opening my eyes. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something, and not just to hop in here, but it kind of goes again with that. Some people, some people want everything with the 200i, right? Some people don't, and there's the 550 plus, that's great. Like Bird Dog, like you touched on, it's a good training tool as well. The Alpha 10 that we just launched, I mean, that thing, have you seen it? It's tiny. I mean, it's using that same concept of the ProView Delta, and it's essentially, I think I got it right here. It's a handheld thing about that big, right?
Not even,
and it can still,
half the size of a modern cell phone.
No, not even half. I mean, it's palm size, but I was using this this past season as well, and it's just for a different use case where it's like if I'm going to places I'm more familiar, I don't need robust mapping. I just kind of want something that I can, do a quick glance.
Lag.
Check out the dog. I can do training on this as well. You can pair it in like the other units to a 200i or Alpha, and have it as an auxiliary unit. So it's like if you and I are out hunting, give you this, you track my dog. You know what I'm saying? So it's like it's a great auxiliary unit. But again, going back to the thing of like, well, if you don't want that much horsepower, there's options for you as well, which, hey, simplified tracking right there. Still do up to 20 dogs, and you can pair it into your cell phone. It works really, really well when you're pairing it into your cell phone as well.
Yeah. For me, I use that Alpha 10 paired to my tread device in the truck.
Yeah.
So it's tracking my Alpha 200 as well as the dogs. So I can just leave that in the truck, connected to an external antenna, and see the dogs on the screen in the truck, and still have my 200i in my hand if I need to get out. And, I'm not unplugging stuff and worry about repairing things. And it's just right there.
Yeah. It is a different interface though. So it's like, you see, it's the first time that there's a toggle switch we've got on it. And that's how you move back and forth through the menus. And, that was something, because I'm so used to the, our other systems, that took a little getting used to on it. But once you get used to it, it becomes pretty intuitive on that side.
Well, and just from a cost saving standpoint, I know a lot of guys years ago, I mean, probably even still now, were running two, Alpha 100s, and one for a handheld and then one in a truck.
Yeah.
Hooked to a drive track. So you had that second unit. And heck, that could save you a lot of money than an Alpha 10 and an Alpha 200.
Well, I think that handheld, that Alpha 10 handheld is $349, so there you go.
Basically half the cost of a 200, right?
Yeah.
Charlie, can you hear us and everything?
Yep, I got you.
Well, you got a pretty cool job, like you said, your product support. And so whenever us hound doggers and bird dog guys have issues with our dog tracking issues, we end up calling you or somebody that like you. So why don't you kind of go over some of the common questions or problems people have with their units that you see on a kind of a more regular basis?
Right. All right. So, I mean, it's kind of a toss-up between, communication issues. So like lost GPS or lost connection with, between the handheld and the collar, and battery life issues. With the battery life stuff, every situation is different. We do our best to try to, troubleshoot those issues. Biggest things you can do to help, keep your collars and stuff charging properly. Clean those contact points where the charging clip plugs in. Make sure those are nice and clean. Change clips if you can. If you have extra clips laying around, try changing clips. Sometimes, a lot of us use what we call those split adapters or the Y cables, to where you can charge two off of one power port. Sometimes taking that out of the equation can help.
Okay.
Those are really the biggest things, for that. As far as communication issues, keep up with your software updates on the collars and the handhelds. If you call in, that's going to be one of the first things with most issues that we're going to ask is, have you updated the software? Check your antennas. So the long whip antenna on the collar, and then that removable, longer antenna on the handheld. If those get damaged, that can cause, communication issues between the two of them.
Now you said about updating software on your units. Can you go through how to do that? Because I know I did not realize the importance of that until a couple years ago. And
Mhm.
a friend of mine used to work for one of the larger dog supply companies. And he's like, yeah, you should really be updating that. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I had my Alpha 100 for probably like 4 years. I had never updated it
Right.
for my collars.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, like I said, updates are super important. When we get calls and we start seeing, people say, oh, this particular issue, a lot of times we can do a software update to address that issue.
Mhm.
Or it's something simple like, customers calling in, I wish this menu could be slightly different, make it a little easier to use. We take that feedback and sometimes we'll put that into a software update to fix that.
Cool.
So as far as updating the systems, most everything except the TT15 and the full-size T5 collars can be updated using Garmin Express.
Okay.
So you just download that to your computer, whether it's the handheld or the collar. The handhelds, you just plug it in with a USB cable into the computer, run that program. It'll look for any updates and it'll apply them. The collars, you actually use that charging clip.
Okay.
So where you can pull it apart from where it plugs into the wall.
Yep.
It's got that little mini USB port.
Mhm.
So you just plug in a USB cable to that. The trick with the collars is you cannot use the split cable.
Oh,
If you have that split or that Y cable in there, because that's only a power cable, that's not going to allow any data transfer. So you have to pull that out. And then just the same way, if it's a TT15 Mini or any of the new X series collars, you can use Garmin Express. If it's a full-size TT15 or a full-size T5, you'd have to use Garmin Web Updater. So it's a little bit different program, but they'll do the same thing. You run that program, it's going to search for any updates that you might need, and it's going to apply them.
gotcha. Now, and I know Rehan had already said, like, all this is on the Garmin website. So
Right.
with detailed instructions, like we're
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
super detailed here. Like most people listening to this are riding down the road or, they're not sitting at a computer looking
Mhm.
at their collars. So, but just kind of giving an overview of things.
Yeah, and kind of to plug our support center, really, I mean, if you go into our support center, it'll have a spot, it'll ask you what device you have. So you could type in TT15, it's going to take you to that support page. And then even from there, you can type in software update, and it's going to give you step-by-step instructions on really how to do most anything you really need to know how to do.
Okay.
Yeah, that stuff's really good. And before we get too far off of it, two things I just wanted to mention on the software and on the updates. One, that stuff is always free, right? So that is always going to be free from,
Correct.
For us working through things that customers want and need, or a lot of times we'll roll in new features for that. So it's that constant evolution of it. And then the way I like thinking about it when we're talking about the importance of a software update or keeping your units up to date. When you think about it, it's kind of like a 3-point system when it comes to like GPS and stuff like that. It's not just handheld talking to collar, it's talking space, you know what I mean? Like GPS. And so it's like, if there are changes kind of in that third party and satellites or anything like that, keeping that stuff updated is just keeping all the things talking the same language, if that makes any sense. Right.
Can you explain that a little bit? Because I don't think everybody always has the best grasp on how this stuff actually works. I mean, like I said, I'm not saying we need to go into like super detailed but just a basic understanding of how this stuff, like you're saying, how it triangulates, and it's not just the two units talking, like the unit and the collar.
Yeah. So Charlie, Charlie and I were talking earlier, like, and you give a really great explanation, like between the different antennas on the collars themselves. Charlie, you want to give that rundown? I think that kind of explains things pretty well. Though.
Yeah. So, I mean, the collars, they actually have two different antennas on them. So you have that long whip antenna. That's going to be the VHF or radio signal antenna, and then you have that little black box that's kind of offset from like where the shock prongs and stuff sit. That's the actual GPS antenna for the collar.
Oh.
So what happens is the collar gets its location, its GPS signal through that little square black box.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that black box's function is. That long VHF antenna is what sends that GPS location information to the handheld.
Okay.
And that antenna also is what receives your training functions from the handheld. So when you press the tone button or the vibrate button or the stimulation button, that's what receives that information.
Gotcha.
That's also important to note that if that antenna, and that antenna is aircraft cable, but it's like, you know, the dog starts chewing on it or it breaks,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can't just randomly cut that thing or have it snap and expect it to function the same way, if that makes any sense.
That's a lot of where your range issues can come in. You know, you'll have a collar that gets one of those long whip antennas gets broken or something. That's going to drastically reduce. You know, kind of think of it like, you know, old CB radio days in your truck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get the taller the antenna, you know, on those. I mean, the more range you got out of them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those antennas are that length for a reason.
Okay. I'm learning stuff here. Now, we talked a little bit before, and you were also saying about, besides the updates, cleaning out old tracks and checking those antennas, like, is kind of something you need to be doing. So what's the reason for cleaning out the old tracks?
So basically, you know, think of your handheld, your Alpha 100, your 200, as basically it's a little computer in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, any of us have used computers for any length of time. If you start getting a bunch of information and a bunch of files, it starts getting towards the end of its memory capacity, things slow down. Mm-hmm. They tend to slow down, they freeze, you know, they start doing all kinds of weird things. So keeping those old tracks cleaned out just really helps you, you know, keep that thing running smoothly, you know, helps prevent it from freezing up completely on you. You know, I've had it happen to me, you know, before I started really learning the systems, you know, have too much in there and it gets bogged down. Mm-hmm. So it just helps keep, you know, the screens moving, you know, clearly, just keeps everything working, you know, smoother.
Nice. And then you said checking antennas. What are we looking for when we check in these antennas? Obviously,
so
the dog's chewing on the one end of it. That's pretty easy.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, Rehan, you kind of, you know, touched on that with, I think that's probably one of the biggest is probably dogs chewing on it. I've had it happen.
I've seen plenty of it happen.
You know,
and more than one dog in a box. And
right.
All of a sudden they come out and here you got half an antenna.
I mean, I had a dog get hung up by that long whip antenna in the dog box one day and couldn't come out, and it pulled the little end of it off. You know, weird little things like that. You know, just check to make sure it's in good shape. You know, it's not cracked, it's not chewed up. Mm-hmm. And alternately, really the same with the one on the handheld.
Gotcha.
You know, make sure it's screwed down tight. It's not chewed up. You know, not wires exposed from under the rubber coating. Those kinds of things. Because that's, like I said, when we talked about how the system kind of works together, that's where your range comes from.
Out of curiosity, what's Garmin's stance on the quick connects? Do you guys hate them?
We
don't suggest them.
I don't, you know. Well,
yeah, we don't suggest them.
Gotcha.
I don't know, you know, from a customer support, I'll leave it the official answer there, but it's like, if something does happen to that whip antenna, like you can just buy those and swap them out. You know, that's not a tough thing to do. And it's just keep it in proper working order, I guess is what I'd say on that one.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah. And what are they? I think they're like $10 or something like that for a new antenna.
Something like 10 or $15, I think. Something like that.
Somewhere right around there. So if it does happen that you break it or dog chew it, you can swap that out pretty easy.
Yep. Now, say I'm out hunting and I've had it happen. I had a collar one time, lost signal and never picked up. I've seen people do some things in the field, like shutting stuff off to try and get it to reconnect and, you know, goofy stuff like that. What's your stance on that, Charlie?
Well, you know, I mean, that's a tough one. I get it. You know, I've been there. I've had callers, you know, just quit working on me. I would say really until you get the dog back, if the dog's out running, until you get the dog back, I mean, your real best course action is just going to be get to the last place you had a connection and try and get that thing picked back up. Mm-hmm. You know, we don't suggest doing any kind of resets to the handheld while your dog's out in the field. Just because, you know, it is still making that, you know, it's still making that connection. It's still trying to regain that connection. So if you go to the info page for your particular dog that you've lost and you see GPS is completely grayed out. You've got no GPS signal on the collar, but you still have communication, and it'll tell you how much battery life. It's still connected to that collar. There's just a break there with the GPS somewhere.
Gotcha.
There is a slight chance, if you reset that handheld while the dog's out in the field, is when you reset a handheld, it clears the collar out of the handheld. Even if you have the track and training codes, there's a slight chance that it might not add back if there's a bigger issue.
Gotcha.
And then you're really stuck.
Yeah.
One thing you could try doing is if you're hunting with a buddy, and you got those track codes, pair it to theirs.
Yeah.
And see if they can pick it up. So then at least you have two going at once. And then once you get them back, get that dog back, you can look at the collar, and based on how that green light is flashing, it'll tell you whether it's got a GPS connection or not.
Yep.
So, I think a lot of people probably know, maybe some don't, but if it's just doing a steady, it's blink, does one blink and then a pause, then a blink and a pause, it does not have a GPS connection. If it's doing 3 in a row real quick and then pausing, then it has a GPS connection. And then we'd be looking at different, troubleshooting steps at that point.
Yeah. I know we talked a little bit about putting collars in a box, and it messes this stuff up. And one thing we haven't really talked about is, and I know I run into it a lot in West Virginia because there's so many hunters in such small areas, is you almost always run into interference with other collars. How can hunters try to limit that? And the worst part is I know I was talking to the guys over at W, and they have this big master list. If you're going to hunt with a bunch of people, you can enter all these codes in to not interfere, but it's not people you're hunting with. So
right.
Is there anything that we as hunters can try to do to limit that, help that situation?
If it's not people you're hunting with, that does make things more difficult. If it's not people you're hunting with, honestly, the best thing I would suggest is, if you haven't turned your dogs loose and you're seeing that interference, go into your handheld and change your collar ID number until you don't have interference anymore. If you're hunting with a bunch of other people, it's time consuming, but you can, that list, we have them on our website too. Then you would want to just sit down with your hunting buddies, adjust everybody's IDs to the appropriate, number so they're not interfering. When you start getting in where you're hunting clubs with 100 dogs, then it starts coming down to, it's just a limit with the technology. There's only so many ID numbers, so much we can do, to take care of that.
No, I was just recently down and talking to some guys that run deer dogs. So they have a lot of dogs, and they often run all together. So it pays for them to sit down and go through that list and make sure everyone's collars don't interfere. Like I said, I know the hard part is you show up to a field trial, there's all kinds of people there, or you're out on the mountain and there's just, another group happens to be there as well, and it's all public land, you're hunting together, not together, but together.
Yeah. And if it's not people you're hunting with or people, it's a little bit harder to be go track them down and, hey, let's change all of our IDs and stuff. The best bet is just to change yours until you don't have it. Ideally, at a field trial, you'd get everybody together and adjust IDs, but that's probably not real logical.
It's an as Charlie kind of mentioned, there's a limitation within the technology. If you look at it, there's, I think, 5 MERS channels or 5 MERS frequencies, and then essentially 20 different channels. So there's only so many different pairings that you can really make with those numbers. And so the eventuality of it, cross paths, interference, but kind of as Charlie mentioned, being able to get that dog and changing that ID will hopefully get that taken care of for you.
Yeah. It goes back to that whole 200 thing. One of the reasons I would like to get a 200 eventually is just when I hunt with other people, it's like you can put their collar in and then just deactivate it if I'm understanding things.
Right. Yep.
It's like I could kind of toggle back and forth, where before it was like, no, I've got to just not enter their collar in my system. If it's somebody I'm just hunting with for the day or something, it's not somebody I hunt with regularly.
Yeah, and then if you have to deactivate one of their dogs, rather than change it, you can just do one at a time if you want. That's another really nice thing with that group feature.
Yeah, definitely understand some of the benefits of it. And it sounds like a pretty promising unit, and it should fix a lot of the not issues, but just limitations of the 100.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. It's kind of like that inReach. Like once you start using it, you never want to stop using it, type of thing. And it always, from my perspective, it's always amazing to hear like what the engineers are doing, and like, like Charlie said when he first started testing, when I first started using it, it's just like, man, it is just so cool. And I never thought, like so many people, like I never thought I'd give up the 100, right? And then once I started using the 200i, it's like, yeah, I mean,
haven't
like,
touched mine.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Another thing I suggest is, if you do end up having to call in, kind of as a request from the product support side, have your devices with you
Okay.
when you call in. If it's not a charging issue, make sure everything's all charged up. And be near a computer if you can be.
Gotcha.
Just so we can, it's hard if you don't have your equipment with you for us to troubleshoot things. Then there can be some back and forth, and we want to get you back out and going and back out and hunting. Especially me personally, I hunt with dogs, multiple times a week usually. I want to be back out. I don't want to be down my equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Having all that stuff ready to go, we can, do our best to get you back out quicker.
Awesome. Unless you guys have anything else, I think that's pretty much all I had prepared.
I would just say thank you very much for having us on.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys.
Well, if anybody has any questions, like I said, check out all the stuff on the website, all of that stuff. And Charlie, offhand, do you have the customer support number, or
it's
set up later?
Yeah. It's 1-800-800-1020.
800-1020. Okay.
It's easy to remember.
Yeah. Super easy.
Yeah. And no, the only thing, like I said, thank you very much for having us on. Everybody, if you have any other questions, please email Ben. We'll try to get those taken care of.
Right.
So
thank you guys, and have a good day.
All right. You too.
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Tree Talkin' Media. And until next time, keep them talking in the timber.